Welcome to the Fury Theory podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business. I'm joined by my colleague, Adam Belmar. John Easton is on assignment on the left coast. We are joined by Kate Ackley. Kate covers lobbying, influence, and political money for CQ Roll Call. She is a must-read for anybody in the lobbying community. I love reading her stuff. She's an expert on K Street and the relationship between Congress and those seeking to influence it. Kate grew up in Denver and graduated from the University of Colorado. Are those the Buffaloes?
That's right.
Go Buffaloes.
Go Buffs.
All right. Welcome, Kate Ackley. Theory 1, the swamp is still swampy. Lobbying is one of the few professions specifically protected under the Bill of Rights in our nation's Constitution. Here's my theory. Getting rid of lobbyists is not only a fool's errand, it's unconstitutional. Candidate Donald Trump, like his predecessor, President Obama, promised to drain the swamp. But when it comes to the lobbying industry, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Kate, you are an expert on K Street. We are a lobbying firm here at EFB, although we do a lot of other things, including our podcast. Looking at the latest financial disclosures over the first year of the Trump administration, what is your analysis of how things have changed in the lobbying community, if they've changed at all, under President Trump?
Well, one thing, there was certainly a bump in the lobbying revenue, as I'm sure you saw, last year versus 2016, an election year when Congress was very much gridlocked. You know, you had the last winding down of the Obama administration, so it was not a big year in 2016. 2017, the first year of the Donald Trump presidency, lobbying was definitely up. There was a lot going on, especially in the fourth quarter, the last 3 months of 2017. That was the tax bill.
Right.
I mean, and that was just, spurred on a whole bunch of lobbying, mostly in support of it. But there were other, there were home builders and realtors and certain groups that had a lot of problems with the initial versions of the tax overhaul, and so they certainly got in there and worked hard to change things that they didn't like.
That's me pointing at the mic to make sure people can continue to hear you well.
Okay, but I think overall what we found was that if you look at you always expect the first year of a presidency, the first year of a new administration, probably to be the most active.
Right.
Those first 100 days. Everybody looks at those as being, a bonanza for policy and legislation. The Trump administration sort of got off to a difficult start.
Yeah.
With the Republican Congress, there were really high expectations that the all Republican control, they were going to repeal and replace Obamacare, the 2010 health law. That has still not happened, although in the tax overhaul, obviously there was a repeal of the individual mandate, so they can kind of say that they're working toward it still. But the bump was not as big as the bump in 2009, the first year of the Obama administration. And we have a data guru, his name is Sean McMinn, and he's been running the numbers for us. And so we had a story right away on Tuesday after the lobbying reports came in that showed that, that first year of the Obama administration, there was a big bounce.
Yeah.
But you have to think about the times, too. There was the, we basically had an economy in a tailspin. We had the, fiscal crisis happening, beginning of the Great Recession. They were working on what became, what we call Obamacare. They were working on the Dodd-Frank financial regulatory overhaul. So there was a big agenda in 2009 that had a lot of corporate interests concerned.
Yeah, so motivation, fear, and opportunity. We were talking about this before. They had a lot to fear from Obama. I think they sense a lot of opportunity from the Trump administration. When you talk to different lobbyists, they feel like they've fully recovered from the financial crisis, because there was a great contraction especially in fees. I mean, you used to have these huge fees, and then I think there's a contraction. And there's also a lot more lobbyists, isn't there?
Actually, the number of registered lobbyists was shrinking during the Obama years. I think for people like you all who are in the business and you are, going up against competitors to pitch business, it probably doesn't seem that this is a contracting industry, right?
Right.
I mean, it
There's
seems
a lot of
like
people out
they're-
there.
Exactly. What we have found, in looking at data and also working with, nonpartisan groups that crunch the numbers like the Center for Responsive Politics, we found that a lot of the people who have deregistered and are no longer registered lobbyists actually have the same titles. They still work for the same firms. So, there's sort of a sense that maybe, the Obama administration put new restrictions, wouldn't hire lobbyists for administration jobs. And, also at the same time, around 2000, a little bit before the Obama administration, in 2007, was the new Honest Leadership and Open Government Act, which revised the Lobbying Disclosure Act. So all of that is just to say that the restrictions and the regulations got a little bit tougher, and maybe people have decided that they don't meet the criteria and they don't want to just register for no reason. We think there's a lot going on. I think personally that the doing away with earmarks, those little member-directed pots of money, I think that shrunk a piece of K Street, of the influence industry, but surely there are a lot of people that are out there influencing Congress and the administration and public policy, and they are not seen on the public disclosures.
So that you've just outlined the point that it's hard to put a number and therefore size the lobbying industry in Washington if your metric is dollars brought in based on registered lobbying. So is it fair to say that it's hard to make a comparison, apples to apples, between these two administrations in that way? How do you capture the rest of the activity?
Well, we know that there is the lobbying fees that are disclosed, and so that's what we looked at. And there, if you look at inflation and you sort of adjust, it's about the same.
Okay.
So 2009 and 2017, about the same. There was a more dramatic bump from 2008 to 2009 than there was from 16 to 17. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot that's going on that we can't really monitor. We know that the registered lobbying fees are about $4 billion a year. So we know that it's about a $4 billion a year industry that is disclosed. But as far as what's going on in terms of grassroots organizing, messaging development, all the sort of non-lobbying public policy work that companies are engaged in, that's hard to monitor. We don't know.
Let me ask you this question. In your conversations with lobbyists, I mean, one of the things that I would love to have happen is if there's a ban on lobbyists giving campaign contributions. That'd be great for me because then I wouldn't have to give campaign contributions. The influx of money in politics and where the money is coming from. Yes, lobbyists give some money and they give as much money as they can. But really the big money is coming from outside, from billionaires. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's changing the lobbying business?
Right, absolutely. I did a story a couple of years ago where we looked at the top lobbyists in terms of campaign donations, who'd given the most of their personal money. And most of them, are kind of in the maybe $150,000, $200,000 range. Now that's a lot of money. Obviously, that's more, that most Americans make over a 2-year period, which is an election cycle is 2 years. So you give that amount of money. You have 24 months to give that. But it's still, if you look at these billionaires, on the left, there's Tom Steyer, who's been running ads, trying to get people, wanting to impeach the president. That's been one of his, issues that he's been.
Which Nancy Pelosi doesn't really want to talk about, right?
Right. That's they've been saying that it's too.
Just calm down, Tom.
Not talk about that right now. But he's obviously bankrolling not only those ads, but they're doing a lot of grassroots organizing in particular states. Virginia, they're doing a lot on immigration, trying to mobilize people on the immigration issue. Those are, you're talking about, lots and lots of money, not to mention the super PACs that can come in and sort of rev up people on an issue, at least theoretically. I think, lobbying campaign donations still matter. The fundraisers are one of the few opportunities that lobbyists have to kind of mingle with lawmakers and staff. And there are the trips and the retreats and things like that where you get quality face time that you wouldn't get if you weren't a big donor, because you can't take people out to lunch and stuff like you could a decade ago. But I think I sort of called them the mini mega donors. K Street is sort of, even the biggest donors on K Street are dwarfed by the real mega donors, the
Right.
Adelsons and the.
And I think that's really
Darksiders.
changing the kind of the nature of political money. I mean, it's nice to give a campaign contribution to a member of Congress, and they know that you support them, and that's appreciated. But it doesn't really matter. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the millions and millions of dollars that these big rich people are giving to politicians, and ultimately that does have an influence on K Street, don't you think?
I think that K Street has been trying to grapple with the influence of super PACs, and I don't know if you've seen that in your own client work. If a super PAC has come in, I think it still remains to be seen. People still are giving, big amounts of campaign donations, but I think we never really can know exactly what that direct, there's not supposed to be a quid pro quo, right?
And I don't think there is.
Not right.
Yeah, right.
But I do think that in terms of getting to know offices, getting to know members, there is a still level of transactional nature. They expect that lobbyists are going to host and host fundraisers and bundle money and all that. I don't know that they have the same expectation about super PACs, but it's certainly always the threat.
Right.
So.
Well, I think that's the other thing, is that some of these super PACs come in, and these members have no control over what they're going to say or what they're going to do. And that's very frustrating for politicians. And so the reason I bring these questions up is I do think that ultimately it'll be in the best interests of members of Congress to think about trying to get control over the money again, and perhaps do campaign finance reform, which is, Republicans never like to do campaign finance reform, but it's getting kind of ridiculous.
Well, right after Trump was elected, we sort of looked at what's on the horizon for campaign finance. And, you ask a majority of Americans in polls, and I think it's something like 80-90% consistently say that the current campaign finance system is broken.
Right.
Not that this will come as any shock to anybody, but guess what? Americans are polarized and divided about the solution to that problem. So if you're liberal, you probably think that we need to have something where it's basically like government steps in and there are more regulations,
Or you have
more
taxpayer funded campaigns.
Exactly, that's right. You at least give tax credits for campaign donations and things like that to incentivize small dollar donors and whatnot. If you're on the other side, if you're on the side of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, then you want to see total deregulation on the grounds of free speech. So you have really opposite ideas. We looked at it in the context of who's around President Trump. Don
McGahn.
Yeah, the White House counsel, Don McGahn, as you mentioned, is a former commissioner of the Federal Election Commission, which sets those regulations. And, he's a proponent of deregulation on the grounds of free speech. We sort of expected maybe this year, maybe last year even, that there would be more coming out on that. But so far, it hasn't been. They haven't taken it up, because I think it is controversial.
Let me jump back in here and channel my inner journalist. I like to call myself a recovering journalist, but I think that there's a really important role that the Fourth Estate plays, that you play as an individual with great reporting skills and a voice. My father, Warren Belmar, likes to say the problem is not what the majority of members of Congress rail against in special interests, but vested interests. And so policing that effectiveness of vested interests in trying to shape policy or work to undermine a potential change that would impact their vested interests seems to be, to me, a great part of the charge that you and others in that realm have beyond just taking a look at the numbers and saying, okay, what does that say? What more can we know about the whole story here to shed light on who's voting which way and what interests are impacting the debate and why they're motivated to do so, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right that reporting, especially as it relates to grassroots lobbying and things that are just not disclosed and who's behind something, getting those kinds of scoops is all the more important. And it's harder, than to just look at, this firm's revenue is up or this company spent more or less. That's obviously publicly disclosed, and you can interpret that, it in a pretty obvious way. But it's the stuff, and some of it I think you all are involved in, where you're doing this messaging and social media mobilization to understand who is driving that. Is definitely an important job for reporters.
Theory 2, one man's fake news is another man's truth revealed from God. There is no question that the media world is changing. Financial pressure, digitized media, and the proliferation, it's hard to say that, proliferation
Easy for you to say.
of alternative news outlets means that the mainstream media has to change to survive. My theory, this will get worse before it gets better. The media is antagonistic to this president, the mainstream media, and they will never give him the benefit of the doubt. Kate, you have a bird's eye view of the media world. What is going on with your industry? Is it how is it changing? What is the idea of not having deadlines anymore? How's that?
Constant.
I was going to say, do you not have them, or you just
deadlines.
can't stop them?
Tell us about.
It's the opposite of not having deadlines.
Tell us about the world and the
That's
clickbait
right.
world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so we're at CQ and Roll Call. We're sort of, maybe a little bit mainstream media, but more sort of inside the beltway. So it's some kind of something in between there. But I think certainly we feel very strongly that facts matter, the truth matters. It matters no matter who is in the White House. We do a little bit of coverage of the White House. We have a White House reporter, John Bennett, who is at the White House frequently. He's also on Capitol Hill trying to get a sense for the relationship between Congress and
He calls me all the time.
and
I like
White
John.
House.
He's a good guy.
Okay. But I think we're not, I personally have never been attacked as sort of spewing fake news, and I don't think our organization.
No, I don't think I think Roll Call is
has
a much
been-
different position than, say, MSNBC or Fox on the right, where it's become so polarized. I mean, if Roll Call is kind of at CQ, it is kind of the paper of record for Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and we take our sort of nonpartisan, just we're trying to give you the news and an analysis and insight. But I think, we have, the sort of media industry has been suffering, for a long time, and I think we saw that first in the state capitals and the big town, the big city. And regional newspapers cutting back. That's been a trend that has continued.
Right.
So I think we're missing out on a lot of stories in the state capitals, local news, really that matters to people's lives. And I think that one thing that we, our readership, especially at Roll Call, is kind of anybody that clicks on it. So that can be anyone, but we're not necessarily trying to explain to people how day-to-day policy and politics will affect them. Though I think we can, try to do that, and we certainly on the CQ side try to drill down into the specifics of legislation and try to make sense of it for people. But that's something that's really, I think, has hurt our communities probably.
Yeah, I was on the Hill talking to some press secretaries about talking about a subject matter, and I asked the question, who is your local stringer? Who are the folks who cover your delegation for back home's newspaper? And they said, we don't have any back home newspapers anymore. Everyone gets their information from Fox. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. And I think that this is one of the things that's happened to journalism is that people are not doing, the basics of reporting back home, and so that really leads to an information gap with voters. If you're getting, and this is no criticism of Fox, but if you're getting all of your information from a 30-second news bite about the latest news, you're not really getting in-depth understanding of any issues. And I think that's reflected on kind of what people are, the information they're getting, and how they're activated by that lack of information. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's you can't expect a national TV network to cover your member of Congress or the issues that matter in your own community and your own life the way that a local station or a local paper would. And so I think that's been something that has a real impact and a negative impact on our local, our cities and our communities, that people just are not paying attention and don't have outlets anymore that are giving them, the information that they need.
I agree with what you've said, Kate, but I think that Fury touched on something in the question, in the theory, that I see as being even more important in the discussion we're having right now. And that is that this world of digital media has transcended the word and what people take to mean journalism and journalists. So let me be very clear about this. If you're a lobbyist and you don't register, are you still a lobbyist? In many cases, yeah, you are. But for journalism, in the way that people get information, you have to take a look at a much broader base of broadcasters. Just take a look this week. CNN, which made a $25 million investment in a YouTube sensation guy named Casey Neistat, just pulled the plug on a $25 million investment this week in a channel called Beme. We won't get into the details there, but juxtapose that with a fellow by the name of DeFranco. Phil DeFranco is a YouTuber who is, for all intents and purposes, putting out a daily newscast. Now, it's not the newscast like ABC World News Tonight or CBS Evening News, but it is giving people information that they want. They're detailing the source of the information that they're sharing and all the background of it. But it's who you're getting your news from and how they're giving it to you. So newspapers and television news are just not how young people are getting their news. They're getting it from completely unconventional sources. They're getting a rundown and a discussion and, quite frankly, language that is more colorful than you could say on television. And people like that. And I think that we just don't begin to understand right now how this is evolving. Serious people like us are reading CQ Roll Call on a daily basis. But the vast majority of this nation and the young people there don't want to read it. They want to have it given to them in some context with a little bit of attitude, but they also demand sources.
I don't agree with you to say that I'm a serious person. I think that's ridiculous. Kate, this is kind of what I was getting at, the fact that there's so many proliferations. There's such a proliferation of different news outlets. I think, for example, of Breitbart and how influential Breitbart has been. And, I kind of call Breitbart fake journalism because I talk about fake news. I say they're fake news because they accuse me of being an never-Trumper.
Are you just defending yourself, John?
I'm defending myself,
okay.
And I'm still angry about that because it was completely fake news. But there is just kind of these proliferations on the right and the left. And it's kind of making it hard for people like Roll Call CQ to get noticed because everyone notices the fake news.
Well, and I have to say that as somebody who, is obviously a practicing reporter, last year during the election cycle, I saw people posting stories on Facebook. I have people on both sides of the aisle, right. Views. And there were a lot of things that I just didn't click on or I disregarded because it just didn't seem legit.
Right.
And I sort of took it for granted, I guess, when I looked at something and thought, that doesn't, what is that source?
Right.
I've never heard of that. It's not something well known. And I think a lot of people just didn't. And if it said what they wanted to hear on either side of the aisle, then they embraced it.
Right.
And I think that's something that is, has been part of the discussion since the election, but that's something that you have to have really sophisticated.
I can't tell you how many times I would get emails from aunts or friends back home. They say, is this right? And I'd have to look back and say, no, it's all.
See, at least
it's
they
all,
were asking
it's all made up.
someone.
But
They
yeah,
were
I mean,
asking
right,
someone.
exactly.
Well, there are all kinds of outlets. You've got Snopes, you've got PolitiFact. There's a whole new area where people are coming into because the veracity of what was said. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, God bless him, left us two things. He left his seat and he gave us Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton. He also gave us a quote that we have to remember. You can have your own.
You're entitled to your own
You're
opinions.
entitled to your opinions, but not your own facts. One last thing. I served for a number of years as the senior producer for This Week with George Stephanopoulos on ABC News. It's a very small but competitive space where Tim Russert reigned supreme for very long. But ultimately, when you take a look at the numbers on a weekly basis, in the demo, you have roughly 1.5 million people for all 3 or 4 of the major Sunday morning newscasts, with an aggregate viewership somewhere around 2.3 million. The point I made earlier about the Philip DeFranco show and others that end up getting 5 million views in a day, I'm here to tell you, as journalists and former journalists, we know our trade, but we are not consumers the way that the business folks on the business side of this business consider consumers and where this is going. There's a real disconnect. Even as we talk about this now, I'm trying to point out that it's happening. The future is suddenly upon us.
And Kate, talking a little bit about Roll Call CQ, where do you see changes in that organization? How are they kind of adapting to this new marketplace, or are they going to kind of keep on keeping on?
Well, I think you always want to kind of stick with your core, putting facts and news out. But we do more video, more podcasts, and things like that. So I think there's obviously a realization that, people want to consume news in different formats.
So, yeah, and just to be clear, we at the Fury Theory, we're not fake news.
We're also really not a news show either.
We're also
Let's
not
be
really
clear about that. Even though Kate Ackley, who is an esteemed journalist, is sitting with us for a great conversation.
It's neither fake nor news.
Thank you for that clarification.
We're true facts. No, we're Fury Theories. Anyway, Theory 3, hostile takeover. Earlier this week marked the 1-year anniversary of President Trump's auspicious inauguration. It's been a bumpy ride, especially for the Washington elites who make up the upper crust of this city. Here's my theory. The president has presided over a hostile takeover of Washington by New Yorkers. The president brings a certain Big Apple brashness that the much more genteel establishment in the city still can't get used to. Kate, you've been in this town for a while. How has Donald Trump changed Washington, if at all?
Well, I think that the Trump administration, there's this backdrop of uncertainty about how is it going to handle certain policies? What is he going to tweet? We all know that, and we're all operating under that sort of reality. But I think while yes, there have been people that he's appointed. It's a very wealthy cabinet, and there've been a lot of stories about that. There are a lot of insiders who have been moved into appointments in the White House. Former lobbyists have been welcomed back as they were not in the Obama years, but they had been previously. So you have them in the Energy Department, the Environmental Protection Agency. You have a lot of people from industry and including from lawyers and lobbyists. So I think while it's true that there is a sort of new cast of characters, I think of like Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and he has sort of his Hollywood resume. You have a lot of interesting characters in the Trump administration, but there are still a lot of I'm sure people that that are getting jobs in there, or
Yep.
it's maybe not to the level that it has been in some administrations, but I don't think it's a completely like revolutionized group of people. Do you?
Well, this is what I was kind of getting at. It's fascinating that the number one place to hang out in Washington now is the Trump Hotel, right?
Okay.
And that's where that's where everyone wants to hang out to kind of find out if the Trump people are there drinking. It's interesting because to your point, there's a sense that it hasn't been a complete hostile takeover yet because he hasn't been successful. Kind of almost a rejection of the Trumpkins. Barack Obama, when he came in as president, he did have a sense of cool in the city. He brought this is a cool city all of a sudden. It was you had a lot of Hollywood people always coming in, and they loved President Obama. With the Bush administration, you had a bunch of Texans coming in, and when you had Bill Clinton came in, you had all these people from Arkansas, and they were the Arkansas Mafia. Trump has this group of brash New Yorkers that haven't quite decided whether they like the city or not. My sense is a lot of them come here and then go back to New York. That they haven't really tried to infiltrate the city, unlike the Chicago people or the Texans or the Arkansans. And where they all kind of hang out, it seems to me, is at the Trump Hotel. And that's kind of what I was getting at. This hostile takeover, they haven't kind of gone beyond. It's not like they're going to like Rose's Luxury or kind of hot new restaurants. They're just kind of hanging out at the Trump Hotel. So I think it's fascinating.
I don't know if they're. I think Ivanka Trump moved her family here.
Right.
So you obviously have and Melania Trump eventually moved here.
Have you seen like lots of Ivanka Trump sightings though in like different restaurants?
No.
I haven't either.
But but
you don't
that
hang out.
Doesn't mean that she is.
But it hasn't like it's like.
I haven't seen her in my neighborhood, but.
I know where you live in Brooklyn, right?
Brooklyn.
Yeah,
So.
I live in the Hill. I haven't seen a Ivanka on the Hill at all.
I do think some of them do commute. I think you're right. Some of the officials do commute, but I don't know. I mean, do you get the sense that it's totally transformed or not totally
I feel like
transformed?
it's a little cultural. I like the fact that you mentioned Steve Mnuchin, who is almost a personal hero to me right now. Any man who could bring me Batman versus Superman, which was a greatly underrated movie, which I really enjoyed, and tax cuts. I mean, who does that, man? Nobody. God, Steve, you're the man. But seriously, it's a bit of the culture. And this morning we woke up to some reporting here in Washington, trying to shine some light on what the president's thought process and actions were concerning the special counsel Robert Mueller. And the news was that he had ordered that Mueller be fired, but then, thanks to Don McGahn and some back and forth there, that didn't come to fruition. But I have it on good authority that President Trump likes to fire people on a regular basis, and a lot of them don't go away. Mostly because we saw a television show where his entire raison d'etre was to say, "You're fired." And there is something about that brashness that's permeating the White House. And I think at the beginning, in the first year, to be quite honest, this was the kind of thing that really hobbled their ability to speak in a common language with folks up on the Hill, to begin that dialogue and build trust. And I think as we go into next week, as we see the president give his second State of the Union address, in a backdrop of between shutdowns and all the things that we've been talking about, he is beginning to assimilate a little bit and understand where are the boundaries and how could I do myself a favor by not running into them all the time. It's a takeover, but he's being affected by Washington. He's starting to learn the lessons a little bit.
I think he is. I mean, I would say that I think that my point is that he is trying a hostile takeover, the New York attitude towards the Washington gentility, which Washington has been this town that has certain political norms that have always been everyone has kind of tried to follow those norms where you don't say certain things, you don't do certain things, but the president breaks all those norms all the time. But he hasn't. I don't think this town has necessarily accepted Donald Trump as president yet. And I don't think that Donald Trump has necessarily tried to get Washington to accept him as president. And I think that there's that push and pull. Whereas with other presidents, there was definitely, with George Bush, like I go back, the Texans came in, but there was also the sense that Bush knew Washington because his dad was president.
He had that DNA.
He had that DNA. And Bill Clinton, he was an Arkansan, but he went to Georgetown. He kind of knew Washington, whereas Trump is just someone who is so rejecting Washington, and Washington's rejecting him. And he's trying this hostile takeover. It's not an effort to. I don't know how this ends. I don't know if it ends with Washington bending to his will, or what happened with Richard Nixon.
How does it end, Kate?
How does it end, Kate?
Yeah, I think that's that uncertainty that we were talking about. There is going, I think, to continue to be a level of uncertainty that just sort of is the backdrop of everything, and especially this is an election year, so you've got everybody, on the Hill that's up for re-election, really thinking about, everything through that prism. So I think it's, just fuels the uncertainty.
I remember when I came to Washington in 1989, I always had this sense that I would go back home after about 6 months. And then it took me a while to really get acclimated and accept the fact that I was going to stay in Washington for the long term. And it took me about 5 years. I think for this president, it's taken him some time to really understand that he's going to be here for a while. And I think you're right. I think there's still a lot of people who aren't sure that he is going to be here for a while, and there's that sense of uncertainty. Anyway, so we usually have, and I don't mean to spring this on you.
But we're going to spring this on you.
We're going to spring this on you. We have a segment which we call the lightning round, and what we ask our guests to do is give us a prediction. What would you buy or sell? It could be a person, place, or thing. I'm going to start with Adam Belmar so you have a chance to think about it. Adam, what are you buying or selling today?
Well, I am buying. You know what? I wish I could say what I was buying. In fact, I have to just flip it and say I'm selling. I am selling all of the interest and determination that some people in Washington have for Brexit. I know that we heard a lot about what was going to happen to our Secretary of State and how it was going to be an orchestrated departure. There are so many things that are in motion right now that require a strong hand at state. We may yet see it, but I am selling all the negativity around Brexit.
So you're buying Rex Tillerson.
I am buying Rex Tillerson in the short-term buy on Rexy.
All right. Kate, do you have a buy or sell?
Do I need to have a buy and a sell?
You can have. You can do either way. You can do either way.
You can rent. You can buy. You can lease own.
Well, I guess one of the things that I've been looking at is this discussion about a return to earmarks. Mm-hmm. Are we going to have earmarks again? And would that be the sort of salve of all that, keep us from shutting down the government? But I am going to say that's not going to happen this year. So I guess I will sell that. I'm selling that.
You're selling earmarks.
I'm selling them.
The earmark boom is over.
It's been over for a while. I mean, they may come back.
The mini boom.
They may come back someday, and we're going to talk about it more this year. But I do not see sort of a reinstatement of earmarks this year, this election year.
Right, I tend to agree with you. I'm a big fan of earmarks. I think that they need to come back to restore the credibility of the Congress and its ability to control spending. And I'm fascinated that the president, came out in favor. I think the president is actually trying to get Congress to resume some of his responsibilities, and Congress is kind of reluctant to do that. But I think you're right. I'm going to sell immigration reform. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that I've always been a proponent of immigration reform. I think that the hard right and the hard left, at the end of the day, don't want to get a deal. I'm very sad about that. I think the Dreamers should get citizenship, but I'm going to sell immigration reform. I think that it's just not going to happen, and I feel bad for the country. So that's where I am. Any thoughts on immigration? You think it's going to happen?
Boy, I don't. They sure don't pay me for my predictions.
Well said, Kate.
Except for on earmarks.
Thank you so much, Kate Ackley, for
Absolutely.
joining us
Thank
today.
you, Kate.
And thank you, all our loyal listeners, including Topher Cushman. I mentioned you once again. I'm sorry I couldn't make the event last night, but I'm sure it'll be fun in March. And thank you once again for joining the Fear Theory podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means
Excellent for business.
yeah, baby.